Today we're going to look at how to answer a 16-mark essay on the authoritarian personality as a dispositional explanation of obedience. Outline and evaluate the authoritarian personality as a dispositional explanation of obedience. Let's take that instruction apart one word at a time, because that tells you exactly how to get the marks. Step 1. Understanding the instruction. The first keyword is outline. Outline simply means you must give a clear and accurate explanation of the theory, the key ideas, the key researchers, and the key concepts. This is AO1, knowledge and understanding. In a 16-mark essay, this is usually worth about 6 marks, so think of this as what you would write if the question only said, describe the authoritarian personality as an explanation of obedience. The next key word is evaluate. Evaluate means you now judge how good the explanation is. That includes strengths, weaknesses, research support, criticisms, comparisons with other explanations. This is AO3, and this is where most of the marks are, usually around 10 marks. So, in simple terms, AO1 equals explain the theory, AO3 equals judge the theory. Step 2. Understanding the phrase dispositional explanation. It means behavior comes from inside. It's about personality, not the environment. So, as you write, you must keep linking back to the idea that the authoritarian personality explains obedience through personality, as opposed to situational influences. Step 3. Planning before you write. Think of this plan as a framework, and once you have it, you can flesh it out. This helps you make sure you include everything and that it's in the right order. You could do your outline as a mind map. First, define the approach. What is a dispositional explanation? What is the authoritarian personality? Second, name the researchers. That's Adorno et al., 1950. And third, the context of Nazi Germany. Fourth, describe the personality traits: obedience, respect for authority, and belief in rules and hierarchy. Fifth, explain the childhood origins: harsh parenting, conditional love, and obedience training. Sixth, explain the psychodynamic ideas: repression and displacement, and how they link to prejudice and scapegoating. Finally, explain how it is measured using the California F scale. Remember, this is only worth about 6 marks, so you do not need huge detail, just clear, accurate explanation. Now, let's look at the first part of our answer, where we turn that outline into a short, high-mark AO1 section. The authoritarian personality is a dispositional explanation of obedience, meaning it explains obedience in terms of personality traits rather than situational factors. This explanation was proposed by Adorno et al. In 1950 to explain the extreme obedience seen in Nazi Germany. According to Adorno, some people develop a personality type that makes them more likely to obey authority figures. These individuals value rules, order, and hierarchy, and believe that authority should not be questioned. So obedience becomes a stable feature of their behavior. Adorno argued that the authoritarian personality develops through psychodynamic processes in childhood, particularly as a result of harsh, strict parenting. Parents demand obedience and give love only when the child behaves correctly, which teaches the child to obey rather than think independently. From a psychodynamic perspective, children raised in this way repress anger toward their parents and later displace it onto weaker groups, leading to prejudice, hostility, and scapegoating, while still obeying authority figures above them. The authoritarian personality is measured using the California F scale, which measures agreement with authoritarian statements. High scores indicate stronger authoritarian traits and a greater tendency to obey. Step 6. How to plan evaluation. You should aim for 3 to 5 evaluation points. ideally a mix of strengths and limitations. In this particular essay, our framework is 2 strengths, 4 limitations. When you evaluate, use this simple structure: peel, point, evidence/explanation, and link, so what. The point: this is your headline judgment. It tells the examiner straight away what you are evaluating. For example, one strength of the authoritarian personality explanation is that it helps explain individual differences in obedience. This sentence sets up your paragraph. If an examiner only read your first sentence, they should already know whether you're making a strength or a criticism, the evidence and explanation. This is where you support your point by bringing in research, studies, examples, explanations, evidence, named psychologists, and then the link, the so what. This is where you link back to the question and explain why your point matters. Let's look at the evaluation text of the model answer using Peel.
One strength of the authoritarian personality explanation is that it helps explain individual differences in obedience. In Milgram's study, not all participants obeyed to the same extent, and some refused to continue. A dispositional explanation suggests that those who obeyed most were more likely to have authoritarian traits, making them more inclined to follow authority figures. This strengthens the dispositional explanation because it shows that obedience is not only caused by the situation, but also by stable personality characteristics within the individual. There is research support for the authoritarian personality explanation of obedience. Elms and Milgram, in 1966, found that participants who were most obedient in Milgram's study scored higher on the F scale and reported less close relationships with their fathers. This suggests that harsh childhood experiences are linked to the development of authoritarian traits, which in turn increase obedience to authority. This strengthens the dispositional explanation of obedience by providing evidence that personality development is related to later obedience behavior. A limitation of the authoritarian personality explanation is that much of the supporting evidence is correlational. Elms and Milgram's study showed a relationship between F-scale scores and obedience, but did not manipulate personality. This means it is not possible to conclude that authoritarian traits cause obedience, as a third variable, such as education or culture, could influence both. This weakens the dispositional explanation because obedience may be better explained by situational factors rather than personality alone. Another limitation is that the explanation cannot account for large-scale obedience, such as that seen in Nazi Germany. Millions of ordinary people obeyed authority figures during this period. It is unlikely that an entire population shared the same authoritarian upbringing or personality traits. This limits the dispositional explanation because it suggests situational factors, like social pressure and authority structures, played a greater role in obedience. The authoritarian personality explanation is politically biased. The F-scale mainly measures right-wing authoritarianism and ignores left-wing forms of authoritarian behavior. This means the scale does not measure all types of obedience to authority accurately. As a result, the dispositional explanation of obedience is incomplete and lacks validity. A final limitation is that the authoritarian personality explanation ignores the powerful influence of the situation. Milgram's variations showed that obedience changed depending on situational factors such as proximity and location. This demonstrates that obedience is highly sensitive to environmental cues rather than fixed personality traits. This suggests that obedience cannot be fully explained by a dispositional explanation alone, and that situational factors must also be considered.
A conclusion is not a separate marking criterion, so only write one if you have time. Here is an example of a one-sentence conclusion that links back to the question: overall, the authoritarian personality helps explain why some individuals are more obedient than others, but it cannot fully explain obedience without considering situational factors. So far, everything we've looked at applies to a 16-mark essay without application. That is, a question where you are asked to outline and evaluate an explanation, but there is no scenario. However, AQA very often include a variation of this question, one that looks similar but also includes application, which means it includes AO2 marks. Here is a question that looks very similar to the one we've just worked through, but it includes AO2. Ahmed is a 19-year-old university student who has just started a part-time job as a security assistant. During his training, his supervisor gives him strict instructions and tells him that rules must be followed at all times. Although Ahmed sometimes feels uncomfortable enforcing rules on others, he still follows the supervisor's orders without question, even when he personally disagrees with them. Outline and evaluate the authoritarian personality as a dispositional explanation of obedience. Apply your answer to Ahmed's behavior, 16 marks. Now, at first glance, this looks like the same question, but there is one extra instruction. Apply your answer to Ahmed's behavior. In this version, the marks are now split across 3 assessment objectives. AO1, outline the authoritarian personality, 6 marks. AO2, apply the explanation to Ahmed, 4 marks. AO3, evaluate the explanation, 6 marks. So the thinking process stays the same. But now we add a third layer, the scenario. AO2 is about showing you can recognize the theory in real life. So instead of just explaining the authoritarian personality in general, you must also say something like,
Ahmed's obedience to his supervisor suggests respect for authority, which is a key trait of the authoritarian personality. In the scenario, Ahmed follows his supervisor's instructions even when he feels uncomfortable and personally disagrees with them. This behavior is consistent with authoritarian traits, as individuals with this personality believe authority should not be questioned and rules must be followed. The clear workplace hierarchy mirrors the structured environments that authoritarian individuals respond to, helping to explain Ahmed's obedience as a dispositional trait rather than just situational pressure.
So to recap very quickly, to answer any 16-mark question, you follow the same thinking process every time. First, break down the instruction so you know exactly what the examiner is asking for. Look for words like outline, describe, evaluate, discuss, or assess, and use those to work out which assessment objectives are being tested. Second, plan a skeleton outline before you write. Decide what goes into AO1, what goes into AO3, and if there is a scenario, what needs to be applied for AO2. This planning step takes a couple of minutes, but it's very important. Third, write your AO1 clearly and accurately. Explain the theory, define key terms, and name the researchers. Keep it focused and linked to the question. Fourth, evaluate using Peel point, explanation/evidence, and link. Make a clear judgment, support it with evidence, and then explain why it matters for the question you're answering. And finally, if there is a scenario, that's AO2, application, you integrate it. If you do those 5 things properly, you're answering 16-mark questions in the way AQA examiners will reward.